Hello, welcome back. So this is the second part or second lecture of our first week, and we're going to continue looking at phenomenology, but specifically delving into the relationship between subjects and how we perceive each other as subjects and join together in what's called intersubjectivity. So these ideas relate to Husserl's middle period, and he wrote a book called Ideas Pertaining to a Pure Phenomenology and a Phenomenological Philosophy, which really rolls off the tongue, which becomes known, for obvious reasons, just as The Ideas. This is from 1913. Now, ultimately, he also writes Ideas 2 and Ideas 3, but Ideas 1 is the only one published in Husserl's lifetime as the first volume of what would become the Yearbook of Philosophy and Phenomenological Research. So his archives continue to get published in this yearbook format. So themes we see in Husserl's more mature thought are these: universality, the idea that there are some things we can all experience, that we're not each individually locked into our own personal experience, rather our experience can transcend ourselves. The notion of what Husserl calls the constitution of objects. So asking the question, well, how are objects constructed or constituted for us so that we can access them? The notion of intuition of objects, that is, how do we know objects in some sort of direct sense? Husserl also has this phrase, the given, where he refers to what is meant to be given to us in experience, that we experience as sort of coming to us. We're not consciously constructing or making, it's just kind of coming to us. And then we have to analyse, well, what are we seeing? What are we experiencing? There's this word he takes from Greek, the epoche, which refers to bracketing. It's often translated as bracketing, that is putting aside or putting in brackets our usual attitude, such as a natural attitude, in order to get to the essence of our experience. The reduction is a phrase he uses for getting at the essence of our experience, sort of reducing away all that theoretical baggage and just trying to explore experience itself. The term egology starts to be used to refer to all of the different ways Husserl talks about the self. He sort of divides the self into different types of self, such as the pure ego and then the more embodied ego and so on. And intersubjectivity, which is basically about a self and another self in the world together. So how we experience the world as a shared world and we experience each other. And also he sometimes refers to the intersubjective world as the life world, which is a translation of Lebenswelt from the German. So the lived world, the world in which we just carry on our normal lives and perceive each other and don't doubt that the other one exists. So let's look at universality. This needs a movement from local to more global reflection, Husserl thinks. So at the local level, I concentrate on my own personal subjectivity and the particularities of objects, okay? But when we move to the global level, we start to concentrate on a universal subjectivity and the essence of objects themselves, such that it would give access to true objectivity, that is objectivity for everyone. So the idea is that we can expand upon what we're immediately perceiving to have a sense of what might be perceived by everybody. So for example, let's consider this red chair. In seeing the red chair, if I bracket the actual chair, I can pay attention to chairness or redness itself. Okay, so I can think about the concept of a chair that doesn't have to be red. It could be all different colours and different shapes and different sizes, but it would still be a chair. It's something that everyone can relate to around the world. Or redness itself, again, a particular colour that's not really about this particular chair, but what is known as a universal, something that's could be accessible to everyone, and a concept that transcends any particular person. So some more terminology we can consider. Constitution and constituting objects. This is the act of giving sense to what we perceive, Husserl thinks. So it's not just that we sort of partially construct the object through our act of paying attention to things that we see, but also giving sense to what we perceive. Okay, so for Husserl, humans never just perceive sense data on its own with no meaning attached. We're always kind of giving sense to what we perceive. So I don't just see the shape of a chair and the color of the chair. I actually see a chair. I give it the meaning chair, or I attribute to it the meaning chair. Then we have the notion of intuitions or intuiting. Husserl uses this to refer to our direct perception, which he thinks is self-evident. When I'm just directly perceiving something, it doesn't have to be proved to me. I don't have to make any inferences. I can just see it and trust what I see. Also, the notion of a kind of inner perception, but also any mental act that we can do. So, and I'll give a list in a moment about all the different things that are included in that. And then I mentioned the givenness and the given. This is what is given to us through intuition, self-evidently or absolutely. I might doubt that there's an actual object out there, but I don't doubt the fact that I'm having this experience, right? So I could have a totally fantastical experience of, a pink monster. Now, I might very much doubt that there's an actual pink monster out there. I might think, oh no, I've taken some dodgy drugs or something. But I don't doubt that this experience is happening. There's a realness to the experience itself that can't be doubted. However, there's what is known as the fallibility issue. To be fallible is to make mistakes. Surely sometimes we're mistaken about our perceptions. You might be thinking this, So there's an example given by Dermot Moran, the phenomenology specialist, about toothache. Now, Moran says we can be mistaken about, for instance, which tooth is the problem tooth. I'm feeling a toothache, but I'm not totally sure exactly which tooth it is. However, he says, we can't be mistaken about the feeling of the pain itself. We can be mistaken about which object in the world it refers to, but not about the experience itself. So behind this is what Husserl called the principle of all principles. This is from Ideas 1. He says, enough now of absurd theories. No conceivable theory can make us err with respect to the principle of all principles. That everything originarily offered to us in intuition is to be accepted simply as what it is presented as being, but also only within the limits in which it is presented there, end quote. So this is really important for Husserl, the idea that we're not doubting the experience, but we're also not adding anything to the experience, right? We're not inferring things from the experience. We're just taking the experience as it is. Teeth hurting, or, hurting in my mouth, something like that, like the most basic level of experience, without starting to speculate about which particular tooth it is or what's causing it or anything like that. Just that there's a pain and it's a localized pain. I can't doubt that. Let's talk about Husserl's egology. This also refers to the centrality of this human subject that Husserl thinks is at the heart of the whole world. And he's always implying the ego in every account of the world he gives. So for him, there's always an ego, a basic sense of self that's always relating itself to objects in the world. What this means is that there's never just an object in the world, there's always an ego that's encountering it. But there's never just an ego in the world, there's always an object it's referring itself to. So through what he called the reduction, we peel back layers of the self to reveal some sort of basic essence of ourselves. So we can sort of turn the process of reduction on ourselves as well to reveal who we are as an essence. Sometimes Husserl uses this language of poles, ego pole and object pole. So on the one side, the ego pole, he says, on the other, the object as counterpole. So you can imagine them as sort of two magnetic poles, can't have one without the other, right? And they're sort of balancing each other all the time. So what he's trying to say here is that each is essentially relational. You can't have one without the other. If there's an ego, then there must be something the ego is perceiving or relating to, directing itself to. If there's something, there must be somebody perceiving it or relating to it. So you can see this is why Husserl might call himself an idealist, because the idea of a completely separate world, separate to subjectivity, is not something he gives credence to. So Husserl uncovers many senses of the ego, and at base, he thinks of the pure ego as the kind of most basic form of ego, as pure directedness towards whatever we're experiencing. So unless you're asleep, and you might even be dreaming, in which case you're still directing yourself towards other things, as long as you're conscious, you're basically always directing yourself to something out there. So he says, also in Ideas 2, I take myself as the pure ego, insofar as I take myself purely as that which, in perception, is directed to the perceived, in knowing to the known, in fantasizing to the fantasized, in logical thinking to the thought, in valuing to the valued, in willing to the willed. Okay, so all of these verbs are referring to different ways of intuiting something out there. Not necessarily a physical object, but an idea, something out there, directing myself to something out there, right? And there's many, many different ways of directing ourselves, our consciousness, to things out there. So what he's saying is it's purely relational. It has no substance of its own. At the most basic form of ourself is a kind of almost a no self, right? There's no substance of its own. It's just pure directedness. And it's transcendental, that is, it's a condition for experience. Without some ego to do the experiencing, there can't be any experience. Now, what about the body? Because we're not actually pure egos, are we? I mean, we're egos with bodies, right? So Husserl struggles to fit the body into his scheme, and his thought sort of changes and develops over time with respect to this. Where does the body fit in? Do we say that it fits in on the side of the ego or consciousness? Or is it more on the side of the object and the world I am conscious of? He says some interesting things. For instance, I am not my body, but I have a body. I am not a soul, but I have a soul. Now, in this sense, it seems to be he's distancing himself from the idea of my body or my broader identity, psyche or soul. So I can look at my body, or I can look at my identity, think about my identity. So what's this I that's sort of thinking about everything? Husserl names that the pure ego. But he also says the body is the phenomenal partner and counterpart of all perceptions of things. That is, whenever we see things, the body's always there. The body's implied, right? I see things through my eyes and I feel things through my hands. My body's always implied and it's always there whenever I'm perceiving something. So the pure ego can't perceive anything on its own. The pure ego can only do things with the body, with the partner of the body, right? So Husserl at least gives the body the same or equal status with the ego. But there's still this issue of, well, what's the relationship between this ego and body, which is, the good old mind-body problem. And Husserl wants to overcome that, right? Because he doesn't really think the mind and body should be considered as totally separate. But he understands that we can sort of conceptually distance ourselves from our bodies as well. Like when we say, I am not my body, I have a body. So it's a real riddle. Husserl gives an example of a cat. This is a picture of my long deceased cat Tristan, may he rest in peace. So Husserl says, in the objective world space, there appears here and now this objectively real cat. It is something physical and moves physically, just like other things, except that beyond the merely physical qualities, it constantly has its ideological and psychic ones. That means like sensual qualities and mental qualities. So it can sense and it has some sort of consciousness. The excess of reality beyond the mere physical thing is not something that can be separated off by itself, not something juxtaposed, but something in the physical thing. So he's really struggling here with embodiment, and he's trying to capture what he thinks is a fact about embodiment, that there's more reality going on than just the body. It's a conscious body, it's a lived body, and you can't just separate off the consciousness from the body. Somehow the consciousness is in the body. So there's a kind of real fusion going on here. So Husserl talks about double constitution to try to capture embodiment here. He says the body is originally constituted in a double way. First, it is a physical thing, matter. Secondly, I find on it and I sense on it and in it. So in other words, he's saying when we attribute meaning, perceive and attribute meaning to our body, to my body or someone else's body, first, there's a sense that it is a physical thing. It's in the world, it has extension, it has mass, it's matter. But secondly, that I can sort of sense it and I can feel myself to be within it. And I feel myself inhabiting my body. So there's a double meaning to the body. So he uses the terms introjection and fusion to capture this. He asks the question, how does the body, which is equally a material thing, have in itself and on itself the contents of sensation? Okay. Now, in modern terms, and particularly in analytic philosophy, philosophers will use the term qualia to talk about sensation or the what it is likeness of our experience, right? And it's considered a bit of a problem how to account for qualia or how exactly it relates to the physical things it seems to depend on. So through what he calls apperception, a kind of original self-perception, we fuse the sensual and the mere physical together. And he also uses the term introjection here, as if I were sort of introjecting, I was injecting the sensual into the physical. So I don't see two things. I don't see the cat and the cat consciousness. I just see the cat, right? And when you encounter your friend, you see your friend, you don't see your friend and then your friend's consciousness over there sitting next to your friend. You see the consciousness and the body together as one thing. And he thinks this is an act of constitution we do, whereby we attribute this double meaning to what we perceive. Okay, so issues arising from this. Is Husserl consistent? Can he really fit the body into his ego-object scheme? Anyway, where do the sensations come from? They're not part of the ego. And Husserl is always relating everything back to the subject. There's also a practical question, a sort of academic question about how much assistance Husserl had in his writing. So one scholar, Sawicki, argues that Edith Stein, his assistant, actually wrote rather than merely edited some of the ideas. She was his assistant, but the way it worked was Husserl would basically dictate his ideas to her in a sort of rough way, and she was meant to kind of write them down in a more sort of orderly way, or take the notes and write the final version for him. And so it was argued that she was actually kind of expanding or interpreting his ideas as she went. This might explain some apparent inconsistencies. Stein's and Husserl's philosophical positions sometimes seem to conflict. For Husserl, the transcendental ego, this more pure sense of ego, is the starting point for phenomenology. But for Stein, it appears a more bodily or embodied ego is the starting point. And ideas too sort of kind of swings between these two ideas. So arguably maybe there's more than one person's ideas going on in that work. All right, let's dig down more into embodiment. For Husserl and Stein, they recognize two senses of body. There's the lived body that we actually experience as human beings in the world. And conveniently in German, there's two different words, but in English, we only have the one word body. So we kind of need to find ways to distinguish them. So Leib is the lived body, and the mere physical body, for instance, the body that the doctor examines, that's Körper, which is related to our English word corpse, right? So because we don't have those two different words in English, we tend to translate Leib as lived body, and then we might say something like mere body or merely physical body or something like that to mean Körper. So perceiving another person as a person means seeing their body as a lived body, right? Not just a mere physical body. And they use this term I can to refer to a bodily system of abilities that is not just an I think. This is a term that Merleau-Ponty will use later too. So I'm not just an I think, I'm an I can, because I know I've got a body and I can do all types of things with my body. So there's an interesting question here. How do I see another person's lived body and not just, the outline of their physical body? How is the other constituted for me? How exactly does the other enter into my consciousness? Well, Husserl starts to use this term passive constitution. And Dermot Moran explains it like this. This is from a great book he wrote on Edmund Husserl. He says, how do I constitute someone else as an alter ego, as another ego, with its own centre and pole of psychic experiences, affections and performances? Where they use the term psychic here, it just means mental. How do I constitute other subjects as true subjects and not just objects? Okay, so this is how Moran expresses these questions that are being asked. And Husserl says, we sort of give meaning to the other as a subject and not just an object through a kind of constitution. We're giving meaning, but we're not actively doing it. It's more passive. It sort of comes to us. So he uses this term apperception or co-presentation. So apperception is where I can see more than what is just presented to me. Okay, so for instance, I see a 3D object. I don't just see the face of the objects that are presented to me. I sort of see the other faces as well, but presented as not actually visually present to me, but they're kind of implied, and I sort of put it all together. So just as we can apperceive the other sides of objects that are presented to us, so we can apperceive the mind of the bodily person who is presented to us. When we perceive a person's body, that means we co-perceive their mind. Okay, so we're seeing both at the same time. I don't need to actually have some physical thing called mind in front of me to know that they have a mind. I'm perceiving it, but it's just not directly presented. It's somewhat indirectly presented. So there's other phrases Husserl uses in relation to this: apperceptive transfer, pairing, whereby I pair my subjectivity with someone else's, double constitution or doubled givenness, where I perceive myself with another person. I see myself as a person, I see another person as a person together, or I perceive both the body and the mind together. So there's a sort of doubling of perceptions going on. But how exactly does this work? Well, this is where Edith Stein comes in. She does a lot of work on this. The answer given is through empathy, or Einfühlung, which is the original German term and literally means feeling in. Okay, it's a kind of perception. So this word has become very popular in more recent times. This is the original meaning of the term. It's very close to what we mean, but it's not purely, in the phenomenological context, it's not purely emotional. Feeling the pain someone else is having in a sort of metaphorical sense, but it's more practical than that. So in this sense, it's not just a psychological feeling. It's not self-inspection. I look at myself and work out whether, what I'm feeling about the other person. It's not an inference. It's not, I look at somebody showing some sort of expression on their face and then I infer that they might be feeling pain, for instance. No, it's something more immediate than that. It's a kind of perception. So this gets developed, as I said, by Husserl's assistant Stein. Her doctoral thesis on the problem of empathy gives some concrete examples of this, okay? And it's what she calls non-primary experience. This is experience that's given to me, but not as belonging to me. So when I talk about my experience, you think about that as belonging to yourself. It's mine. I'm having it, and it's about me. It's an experience that belongs to me. But she says that, well, there's another kind of experience, which is I'm having an experience, but it doesn't directly belong to me. It actually kind of belongs to someone else. It's like I'm having access to someone else's experience. So she says it's given to me as not within my sphere of ownness, of what, is owned by me or belongs to me. And she says the experience escapes me partially. So I can't totally get the whole experience someone else is having, but I can kind of get it, right? So Stein's examples she gives in this book are, for instance, seeing sadness in another's face. I see sadness, but it's not my sadness, right? Pain, I can see when someone's in pain, but it's not my pain. And sometimes, depending on how empathic you are, you might actually feel someone's pain. This might be why, sometimes we find it hard to watch something very violent, because it sort of almost feels like it's happening to ourselves. And then it's interesting what she says about the range of empathy. That is, we can empathize not just with fellow humans, but with our fellow animals as well. So she gives the example of the dog's paw. She says that if you see a dog with what is obviously a sore paw, we're able to extend our empathy to the dog, even though the dog has in some ways a very different body to us, but it's similar enough to us such that we can empathize with the dog's pain. So unsurprisingly, we empathize perhaps more with a dog than we do with, say, a cockroach. We don't perhaps care or think about the cockroaches having pain. But we do think about, the closer to us the animal seems to be, the more we empathize. And so Stein thinks this is an interesting example, that empathy doesn't have to be confined to our own species. So on this view, experience of the other is mediate. That's the opposite of immediate. Okay, it's kind of mediated by the other person's body. It's not directly on my body. It's non-primary. It seems to not belong to me. It's coming from somewhere else. But it's still absolutely genuine. It's not hypothetical. It's not just I'm imagining, what if that person was in pain? What if that person had their own subjectivity? And it's not by inference. It's not, oh, okay, premise one, that person is grimacing. Premise two, when people grimace, they must be in pain, and then conclusion, they must be in pain. That's not how it works. I don't go through some inference or deductive process. I just immediately perceive something, but it's not mine. So there's an immediacy and immediacy going on. And Stein says empathy goes both ways between egos. So she calls this reiterated empathy. It can actually help me to see myself as an objective subject in the world. That is, if someone looks at me and I think about how they see me, I can get a sense of how I might exist in the world for other people, right? So I'm not just enclosed in my own personal world. I belong in an intersubjective, larger world, shared world, right? So someone seeing me seeing them seeing me, we're kind of mutually seeing each other and reinforcing to each other that we live in a shared world. Okay, what issues arise from all this? Well, for instance, aren't we just projecting our own subjectivity onto another? That is, you could be more skeptical about this and say, I can't really see someone's subjectivity, I'm just projecting. How can I genuinely encounter the other? When I constitute everything I see. Again, Husserl's idealism might be problematic here. Like if I'm sort of partially constructing everything I see through my ego, how can I actually access the other? And how can I constitute real otherness? Isn't it just then part of myself? Okay, so again, is it just kind of a projection of myself onto what I think I'm seeing rather than what is really out there? So these issues, interestingly, go on to be explored by Husserl's kind of descendants philosophically, so Heidegger, Sartre and Merleau-Ponty among others, because they all in their own ways respond to Husserl. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our first week's material. So this has just given you an introduction to phenomenology and the beginning of the kind of the roots of what will grow into a very, very big and complex tree. So looking forward to having a chat about this in our first tutorial in week 2, and I'm going to put discussion questions online as well. So there's more than one way to discuss these issues, and please feel free to send me any questions. Thank you.